James Luxon, delighted to be joined with Andy Clarke. Andy, how are you, sir?
Very well, hiding from the heat, like everybody else has been the last couple of days, I think.
Absolutely, it's definitely a warm one at the moment. We had a press conference today. Conor Benn, Eubank Jr, Eubank Benn 3, as they're billing it, 30 years later. Talk to me about that fight. How do you see that one panning out with the weight, the catch weight, where they're both, Conor's got to come up quite a few pounds and Chris got to come down a couple of pounds, but that will still be a stretch for him.
Yeah, it will be. It was interesting to listen to him at the press conference today, and I was kind of pleased to hear what he had to say at the press conference today, Eubank, because if this is going to be a proper fight, if it's going to be a level enough playing field, then that catch weight, him getting down to 157, it needs to weaken him and deplete him. Sounds like an odd thing to say, but it has to, because if it doesn't, then this is not a fair fight, because you've got a middleweight up against a welterweight. And Eubank was talking about how it would be him at 60%, but that would still be enough, because him at 100% would just be incredibly one-sided, a public execution, as he describes it. And that's absolutely not what we want to see. The catch weight has to weaken him. I thought originally it might be 156, and I think probably the time it's taken to get the details sorted out would have been all centered around that. You know, Eubank, he can't just be driven down to a weight that he literally can't do, because you'll do the medical checks, and you can do all of this now. You can go and have the tests and they'll tell you whether you can do it safely or whether it's advisable for you to attempt it or not. And 157, I'd imagine, is as low as he feels he can go. He was saying that he hasn't weighed that since he was 18. So it'll be difficult for him. If he makes it and it depletes him and he is 60 to 70%, then I think we've got a good fight on our hands. You've still got to make him the favourite, because he's the bigger man. You see them nose to nose at the face-off, and Conor out of camp, I think, probably walks around at about 11 and a half, 12 stone, something like that. Chris probably walks around at about 12, because I know when he boxed at super middleweight, you know, he didn't really have to do much because he doesn't get out of shape. I am really fascinated by it. I think everybody is, and not just because of the surnames, because of the dynamic of it. But you have to make Eubank the favourite. You have to. And as he said today, for him, it's kind of a no-win, because if he wins, he won't get all that much credit. And if he loses, then as he's described it, his career will be over. Whereas for Conor, I wouldn't quite say it's a win-win, because this definitely could go wrong for him. People are talking about how if he loses, then he can just go back down to welterweight and nobody will really blame him. Well, it depends how he loses. You know, if he gets knocked out, if he gets badly knocked out or sustains some real damage in there, the corner will be on the lookout to make sure that doesn't happen. But this isn't just some kind of shot to nothing for him where, you know, nothing can really go wrong. You know, this is boxing. Something can always go badly wrong.
In terms of the weight, I was told a little while ago it was going to be 155 with a rehydration clause to 161. Would that have been just too dangerous for Eubank Jr?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I don't think he could do it. I'd imagine the reason it's 157 is because that is as low as he will agree to go. He is a pretty pragmatic individual. He understands the business, Eubank, definitely. He knows how to market himself. We know that much, but he definitely understands the business. And he knew going into the negotiations for this fight that you don't want to give anything away, obviously. And he's never done that. But at the same time, he knew that he had to compromise. He had to give ground here, or the fight just simply wouldn't happen, because Team Benn are very savvy as well. You think about someone like Tony Sims. He knows he's got to get Eubank down as low as Eubank will go. And Eubank would have understood that that's exactly what their game plan would have been. He just had to decide how low that was. And there would have been a cutoff point. And if they were saying, well, it's 155 or nothing, he would have had to have said, well, it's nothing then. Because if you try and make me do that, all that will happen is that I won't make it, because I can't. I'll miss it, take the financial penalty, come in as a middleweight and knock your guy out. Like, do you want that? You know, it was a fairly ticklish one, I'd have thought, to negotiate in the end. But yeah, 155 just would have been too much, I think.
You sort of touched on there a little bit for my next question. There is a financial stipulation and penalty if he does come in over £100,000 for every pound he is over. Do you think he might just do that anyway? They're going to make enough money from the fight. Could he come in over just because it may be too much of a struggle to get down to 157?
I don't think so. I don't think so. And the reason being that we don't actually know the full details yet, do we, around all this kind of stuff? I've heard that too, the 100 grand per pound. One thing I've also heard is that if he comes in above 158.5, then the fight is off. That's a safeguard that Team Ben have put in place. And if they have done that, I think that's a wise thing to do, because otherwise you could just miss the weight and you decide a few weeks out, I can't actually do this. So there's no point really trying. Come in at a nice trim 159 point whatever, like you normally would, and essentially come in as a middleweight, and that would give him a massive advantage. So they cannot allow that to happen, because whether you get a couple of hundred more grand in your bank account or not, they want to win. So that is one thing I've heard, that it's 157, but if he comes in higher than 158.5, then the fight is off. And yeah, I like that. I like that, because I absolutely don't want to see him miss the weight and come in far too big. It was the same concern I had with Conor against Brook. That was 149, wasn't it? And we knew that Amir was going to be able to do that no problem, because he's never, he's always able to make welterweight. But I did wonder whether Kel would be able to do it. And in the build up to the fight, I was just thinking to myself, I don't care who wins, but I just really want them both to make the weight the day before, and then we know that they've both done what they're supposed to do, and we've got a proper fight, and they did, and it was pretty one-sided in the end, as it turned out. But that's all I'm really bothered about with this one as well. It's going to be a great build up. It's going to be hopefully a really good fight. I just want Eubank to make that 157 and to be able to do it.
And as you mentioned as well, Eubank said in the press conference he will be at 60%. How much of his talk do you feel was mind games? Conor called it making excuses, putting excuses in place already for when he loses. How much of it was mind games, do you feel?
I think he's probably about right. I think that kind of rang true to me, really. And as I said, he's an intelligent guy. He knows how things work, and it does sound like he's making excuses before the event. Of course, it does, and Conor's right to call it out as that from his side. That's how you would see it. But that looked to me to be an accurate statement, and it was a statement I was pleased to hear, because, as I say, that would make it a level playing field. I think 60% maybe a bit on the low side, but it's definitely going to take something away from him, and he won't really know exactly how much until he does it. For all he knows, it might be a 40% Eubank. It might be an absolute nightmare getting that final couple of pounds off to get down to 157. And then if there's a morning of the fight clause, which we guess there will be, then that could make for a tortuous evening after the weigh-in, making sure that you adhere to that. And Conor won't have any problems with any of that. Chris did say as well, didn't he, at one point, that whether it was today or whether it was a previous quote, that he feels that when they get into the ring, due to clauses of various natures, he doesn't think there'll be much more than about 4 or 5 pounds between them, which could well be true. But that doesn't mean that it might sound like a weird thing to say, but that doesn't mean that they're the same weight or the same size, because you've got one who was used to fighting up there at that kind of weight and one who just isn't.
Absolutely. Chris said today that it's nothing really personal for him. He doesn't dislike Conor Benn at all. Obviously, the fight's being sold based on the surname and the father's rivalry. In terms of the trainers, now, Tony Sims mentioned today he was sparring Nigel around the sort of time that he fought Chris Eubank, and obviously Ronnie was Chris Eubank Senior's coach as well. Is there more, not rivalry as such, but more passion for this fight in the trainers potentially? Will that help the fighters?
I think it's just kind of every way you look, really. The story from back in the day is great, and I think younger fight fans will really, really enjoy getting to know that story better, because they'll all be aware of it. But at the same time, there's so much to get into, and there's so much good stuff to watch. Watch that fight again, and it seems like another it just seems like a fight from a bygone era, doesn't it? In terms of the coverage, I mean, just because they had the 1 hour, it was a Sunday night, bizarrely. They had 1 hour. It's not like now where you get 4 or 5 hours of coverage and people then complain if there's a single undercard fight they haven't seen. It was ITV went on there, quick feature, get them in the ring. There was a problem with that because they cut Eubank's music and all sorts of stuff going on behind the scenes with the taping of the gloves and all the rest of it. But they managed to get them in. And I think if it had gone the distance, they'd have gone over that hour and there would have been problems. And Gary Newborn ends up interviewing Chris before they'd even given the final decision, final announcement after the stoppage and all sorts of chaos. So if you're a younger boxing fan and you haven't really seen all of that, watch it all. There's some good books out there about it too. And I think everybody will just really enjoy reliving that a bit because it was great. It really was. It was one of the things that really, I was already a big fan, but it was one of the things that just sucked me down the rabbit hole from which there is no return, Eubank Benn, because I was 12 at the time, nearly 13 when that first fight happened. So you've got all of that, which is extra spice. But I think the two fighters will, I think they'll just kind of fall into the roles that their dads did and do it naturally because Junior he's doing what he's always been a bit like his old man in that he's nonchalant. He's very, very good at those kind of patronizing put downs where he just doesn't seem at all interested in anything you've got to say, that you really are just there to make up the numbers. This is his show and you've been invited and you should be fucking grateful. That's basically the vibe he always gives off, isn't it? Whereas Conor is just by nature that more kind of spiky character who will react to stuff, who can be quite emotional. So I don't mean they're their father's sons. And I just think the whole thing's going to be great. It'll be really interesting to see what else does DAZN do to try and really drive it into the mainstream, because that is a problem they've got at the minute. You know, it just is, isn't it? And it was always going to be, but it's just ready to go, isn't it? This fight. I mean, it always has been. I say it always has been. I struggled to see how they would bridge the weight gap between these two to make this happen at any point, but they've done it.
Absolutely. And just final one from me on this one, Andy. We've mentioned about, Chris coming down in the weight. Let's talk about Conor going up. He's going to be putting on potentially 10 pounds or close to it. Is he going to lose that edge? Is he going to lose any speed that he possesses by putting on that weight? 'Cause he's never fought at that weight before.
Yeah, and that's the problem, you see, because we're all talking about what might happen to Eubank, stripping the weight back and it'll do this and do that and deplete him. But you don't really know what it's going to do to Conor either, because in percentage terms, it's quite a lot. Obviously, the higher you go up, then the percentage decreases. But at that weight, 10 pounds is a lot. It really is. I don't know what he weighs on the night when he boxes at welterweight. I'd imagine he does put some weight on after the weigh-in. It's never looked to me like it's loads. So maybe if he weighs in at 10 stone, 6 3/4 or whatever, come fight night, he'll be the low 11s. At least 8 to 10 pounds is kind of what you would not necessarily expect. Some people put on less than that, but that's what's kind of advised, isn't it? I think that if you're putting on more than that, actually, it's maybe a bit too much. So it'll be interesting to see how far he goes up. But that he will put the weight on in the right way. He's not going to eat his way up there. But I will be really fascinated to see what he's like in there on the night, because he does have some power. We know that, and he's got speed. The extra weight should help him take shots, but it'll be different for him. It'll be a different kind of experience. I just wonder whether is he going to max that weight out or not, because you really want to fight at the weight that you spar at. And I'm pretty sure when he's getting ready for a welterweight fight, he's probably sparring at around about 11 stone. Yeah, there's a lot of imponderables with this one, but you're right. What we're talking about mainly is how will losing the weight affect Eubank, and people aren't talking quite so much about how will boxing with extra weight affect Conor Benn, but it will have an effect.
We saw recently Bam Rodriguez stepped up 2 weight classes, I think it was, and won a world title and stayed there. If Conor beats Chris Eubank Jr. on October the 8th, do you think he could stay at a higher weight class, or would he go back to 147?
I would expect him to go back to 147, but it might be hard, because that's a really good point in this, because if you stepping up in weight, people think, oh, well, you know, you can just come back down again. But losing the weight, if you've done it right and put it on properly, and it's lean muscle, then losing that isn't the easiest thing in the world to do, particularly 10 pounds of it. As I say, in percentage terms, I'm not going to work it out because my math isn't good enough, but it's quite a lot. And to just sort of bring that all back down again, you might find that it's a real struggle. And maybe he needs to box at super welter. He's talked about going up to super welter before. I remember he was working with us on TalkSport for Khan Brook, and as soon as that fight finished, he was texting Tony sitting next to me, Tony Sims, and just saying, I'll take that fight with Kell Brook at 150 tomorrow, all day, every day. So he's always been looking at fighting above 147, and it could be that it's going to be too difficult for him to get down again. That's another potential complication that people aren't really talking about in this apparent no-lose situation for him. They've done all this work at welterweight, which is a rock hard division, obviously, but they've done all this work at welterweight. And everyone's just assuming that whatever happens on the night, it'll just be easy for him just to nick off that 10 pounds and drop back down to 147. But yeah, you're right. Not necessarily.
Absolutely. Well, either way it goes, it's definitely an intriguing fight, and it's certainly captured the fans' imagination as well. Andy, thank you very much for your time this evening. I appreciate it.
No problem.